I might get rid of it, depending on how we're doing here. All right, so hopefully you're here for the mental health promotion session, right? Last session today, thank you for being here. And I'm going to be handing out some handouts as we go through the first activity, which is really just a get to know you, get to know me type of activity. All right, so I'll give you a little bit of information about myself and then ask folks to just briefly introduce yourself and where you're from, as well as why the topic of mental health promotion is interesting to you. I am Jennifer Jeffrey Pearsall. I'm with the Mid-Atlantic PBIS Network at Shepherd Pratt Health Systems here in Maryland. And I have been involved with PBIS since 2000. And I started as a graduate student at the University of Oregon and learned all things PBIS from Rob Horner and George Sagai at the time. And have spent the duration of my career really working with school systems in how they're organized around the promotion of student well-being, specifically using the framework of PBIS. I'm a school psychologist by training and have worked as a school psychologist for a handful of years in school systems, but most of my work has been with school teams, district leadership teams, state departments of ed, around the installation of PBIS as a framework for how we organize the interventions that we know are effective in promoting student well-being. In addition to working with public school systems, I've also worked with residential treatment facilities, alternative day school programs, and juvenile justice facilities as well. And so, working with a set of population that has well-established patterns of behavioral concerns, as well as indicators of mental health concerns. And so what we're going to be talking about today is the integration of mental health using the framework of PBIS. Right? So what I'd like to get you all talking about is yourself, and just give a brief, who you are, where you're from, and why mental health promotion is interesting to you at this point. And I will be passing these out as you do that. All right, I'm going to start on the right here. Someone in this row. Thank you.
My name is Amy Bauman. I am a first grade teacher at that elementary school in Maryland County. And I think mental health is very important. I feel like a lot of focus is on academic programs to improve testing scores and that type of thing. When I think in schools brought more and about mental health, I think that would improve test scores. So our county spends a lot of money on programs, and I think there should be more money spent on getting mental health out.
My name is Cassie Wright, and I teach at North Carolina High School in Cameron County. I am a reading intervention teacher in grades 9 through 11 usually. I teach kids from our high-risk program, our self-esteem program, as well as those that are just below pre-health. And I feel as though mental health is very important, especially since a lot of my students that I have had in my previous 10 years, most of them have had issues
And we are fortunate in Indiana County that we do have a partnership with a few different behavioral agencies that provide school-based therapy for students, and we have a number of students that do receive weekly therapy sessions. And so we, I know, are looking for ways to continue to promote mental health services in the school setting in our county.
Kaylee Kovac, the assistant principal at INTEGRATINGMENTALHEALTHgetfvid County. And I think mental health in general, both for the students and for staff, I mean, I just think it's critical, and I think we all need to better learn, what it's about and how to help each other. So we can be more successful as staff, and the students can be more successful in the classroom.
I'm Ms. Slaw from the school council at Church Elementary School. And of course, mental health is so important, as you mentioned, with staff and students. It's part of who we are every day. It's not something that's just separate from our everyday interaction. We all need to be emotionally healthy and socially healthy. And when we're sick physically, sometimes we'll stay home, but when we're not feeling, when we're having social issues or emotional issues, sometimes we don't. And you've got kids carrying in all of those things with them every day. So it's a part of who they are every day. So how can you not address mental health?
My name is Caitlin Carroll. I'm a fourth grade teacher at Leanna Elementary. And I think mental health would be nice to have a better understanding of the students and how we can help them.
I'm Melissa Hall, fifth grade at Leanna Elementary in Winchester County. Just looking to maybe just have a better awareness of mental health. Right. I'm Kelly Harold. I teach at Madison Elementary, teach third grade in William County, and I think it's a wonderful thing that we're starting to talk about mental health a little bit more, because it is something that I think people are starting to be more aware of now and moving on, and it's important to teach the whole child to make sure that we're making the most gains that we can.
I am Amber Nixie, and I teach first grade in Williams County, and I think mental health is important for both teachers and students, and it's just really affecting everybody, and every family that is suffering from some sort of mental health issue.
I'm Angela Lander, I teach seventh grade in Worcester County, and I'm interested in today's session because we are growing number of students receiving mental health services within our building alone, and the number seems to be increasing year after year.
Jerry Ward, Special Education, Seminole School, Worcester County. I also agree with Angela. With the being in 32 years of teaching, seeing the change and seeing increasing numbers and seeing the technology and just the mental load of the families, it's just alarming right now. We finally have a full-time mental health person in our school, and it's a godsend for her to be there to give some kind of relief.
I'm not part of our work with the health system. It's time. What I get is the normal life. It's time for everybody to understand and find training. So,
I'm Leslie Potter. I'm also in the Shepherd Health System. I mean, I think that if we start working with kids to be more aware of mental health, then eventually we'll have more adults who are very aware of mental health, and then I think that would be better for our society.
I'm Krista Taylor. I'm a learning support specialist at Williston Elementary in Somerset County, and the school is a big family one school, and just the increase in our number of students who receive mental health services. Outside of the school is staggering, so any information that I can get to help meet our students' needs is greatly appreciated.
I'm Nicole Chevrolet. I'm the counselor at Tuscaloosa Elementary in Cecil County. Our population is ever changing, and a lot of our super young students coming in with severe trauma issues that are coming into the educational setting. We need to be part of what we can do to help them and help their family find some kind of
told, this time I actually told the school counselor, and I agree with her to whatever he's saying, we just have such an increase in mental health issues with staff, families, and our students.
Bobby Howard said, assistant principal, Uncle Chester Middle School, and I don't know any different extent of everybody else is saying.
I'm Hannah Robinson. I teach 8th grade math at North Winchester Middle School, and I don't know a lot about mental health, but I know that a lot of teachers complain when the kids go see their school-based therapist, but I see the change in them just when they get to have that time with them, and my cousin is one of our therapists, and just having that extra support at our school has made a big difference.
What we do, two over there, yeah.
Okay, I'm Courtney Thompson. I'm a school counselor in Montgomery County, Maryland, in elementary school. And it's just so vital if we want kids to do well academically, they need to be doing well with mental health.
Ashley Chang, school counselor in Carolina. I just think it started to change the public opinion or in the school itself, in schools in general. If you see a kid is injured, you refer them right away, or you see a sign of abuse, you refer them right away. And I feel like now we're finally getting that way to sign of depression or self-harm or
I'm going to go back this way. Yep. You're up.
I'm Bob Merrill. I'm with Kennedy Community Schools, one of the non-public special ed. I'm a psychologist, so I guess I have to I think finding ways to integrate that into the school programming is really important. We've got a lot of pressure on us now, even from the state, recognizing that we have to invest in this and recognizing the economy.
Mary, our teams hire us with an increaser and the K-5 activity programming.
Alan Ryan, I teach at Colonel Middle, Carolina County. I think it's important because I haven't really had a lot of training on dealing with mental health, so I think some strategies can be even good.
I'm Robert Stark, I'm in Pillsbury Elementary in Carolina County, and what everybody said, and I'm hoping to come away with some strategies to help the students with their mental health needs.
In the absence of pressure raised in Paul County, looking for some new strategies for
Here at Chapel District Elementary and School Counselor in Paul County. Same thing, everybody's pretty much shared the importance of it and the fact that we're actually talking about mental health and recognizing it in children and early intervention at such a young age is also important.
I'm Rose Brick, I'm the vice president at the River School. And some of our kids come in depressed. We need to recognize the responsibility to see it and seek help for those kids.
Cody Hall, I teach social studies at Brazil High School. Just looking for strategies to help students.
My name is Shannon, and I'm at St. Michael's School. I think mental health is important so that we can better help our students and just be proactive from the beginning.
Laverne Craig, I'm a school counselor in Worcester County. One of our long-term goals at our school is to have our students emotionally healthy, productive citizens. And in order to do that, we really need to look closely at the mental health of our students and recognize that there are some concerns, but there are also some things that we all can do to assist in allowing children to share and address trauma that is happening to them.
I'm Riley Donovan, from Michigan County, and whatever else I said.
I'm Jeff Beach. I'm a media specialist in Worcester County, and
I'm Captain McDaniel, Worcester County PBIS coach. Like Abby said, the time has come that we address this, and if I expect to learn in my classroom, I gotta know what's going on, so I can be more understanding and understand the whole child, not just the math side of it. Michaela Happy, UK, Buckingham Elementary, Worcester County. Pretty much everyone else I know is just so prevalent these days. It'd be silly for us to not educate ourselves and educate our students on how to deal with it and recognize it.
Chris Adams, alternative teacher in Worcester County. Helping kids come up with strategies on dealing with their behavior, it's helpful to understand why the behavior is the way it is, where they're coming from. So, understanding that mental health is important.
I work with specialists in Somerset, and it happens to be much of my job to help refer children to mental health. It's part of my position, as well as helping with behavioral issues. So, any tools and things that I can use to help better explain that to parents.
Blair Catlin Brown, behavior specialist at Somerset Intermediate. I'm a clinical social worker, so it's kind of my thing.
No, I think. My name is Dylan. I'm a team leader in Montgomery County at a middle school. And I say mine is to see the connection between PBIS and mental health, because there's so many issues for mental health, and to see how the two can be intertwined.
Hi, I'm Bill Allen, point of contact for Carolina County Public Schools, and I really think it's important that we, as a classroom, as an education or unit agency, that we are in tune to mental health and how we complement therapy, so that we're not counterproductive with that therapy.
Perfect. Thank you all for sharing. And so for those on Facebook Live, we just had the audience go around and talk about mental health integration and promotion was interesting to them, why this was a topic that they were interested in. So hopefully you had a chance to do the same thing. Some themes that I heard here in the room included themes around wanting to become more aware of what we can do as professionals to help support kids, wanting to also promote the awareness of other professionals in our building as far as what mental health concerns look like in kids, because our kids often do present different behavioral patterns associated with things like depression or anxiety than we would expect in our adult population. The concept of mental health promotion impacts everyone, and so this is really a whole community, whole school, whole child approach, and we need to really understand the whole child in order to best educate them so they are college and career ready and really productive and happy citizens in our society. I heard some language around stigma too, and that perhaps we're starting to peel away the layers of stigma that are associated with mental health, and just being able to have more open dialogue that our kids do have mental health needs. Our teachers have mental health needs as well, and that we need to be thinking about mental health along a continuum. And so that brings me to this next point, and that what I'm going to be talking about today I want you to really be thinking about this continuum. I want you to be thinking about where we start thinking about mental health-based approaches in schools. And what I'm talking about today are the things that we can think about at the universal level. But there are also strategies that we use at the secondary and tertiary level. And somebody else in the audience will talk about school mental health and PBIS and how these things can work together. And I'm going to share with you a framework that has been developed over the past 10 or so years that really takes folks, experts from both of those fields, and that was the question they had. How can we really interconnect this so we're an efficient and effective system for how we support the mental health promotion of kids in our society? So those are some of the talking points that I'm going to share with you today. get you into an activity in a few minutes and then one towards the end. But we're going to talk about first the context, so lay the foundation there, as well as talk about that interconnected approach between school mental health and PBIS, and then leave with that activity. You all in the audience here have a handout. I don't have one in front of me. But the front page of it, and for those on Facebook Live, this was posted so you could either pull it up on your computers or have it printed out. The first side has context and some fill-in-the-blank notes, as well as ISF and fill-in-the-blank notes, and then the back of it is for the activity that we'll get into specific to Tier 1, PBIS and mental health integration. So feel free to take notes as I move into some of this information. A lot of what I talk about today is pulled from information from other really brilliant and talented people, so acknowledgments are here for that. You'll see on the left there's a picture of the cover of the monograph for the Interconnected Systems Framework. That is the work that came out of the work group of school mental health and PBIS. It's currently under revision, and I'm really excited about what that monograph is going to look like moving forward. It's going to be very user-friendly. So as I talk about this approach, there are lots of layers to really effectively interconnect mental health across all tiers within that PBIS framework. But what we'll leave today with are some concrete steps that you can do now at Tier 1, but monograph and link to information that you can use to think long-term. If we really want to do this across the system, who do I have to have these conversations with at the administrative level at my building as well as at the district, and what resources do I have? So this is available, and we'll send it to Jerry and ask you to post it along with the slides here so you have it as a quick reference so you don't have to hunt through the World Wide Web to find it. All right, so context of need. We'll land on this for a minute. Most of you were talking about the fact that we have an awareness that there's a need, that some folks were talking about the younger kids and having and seeing more kids at a younger age with mental health needs as well as older kids as well. But what we do know is that 40% of adolescents by 7th grade experience mental health problems. 20% of children experience depression at some point, and only half of those are identified and diagnosed before adulthood. And of those diagnosed, only 1/3 receive treatment that they need. Schools have been pointed as kind of that de facto mental health provider, right? We're the place where kids are most of their day, and a prime location for us to become more aware of what behaviors to look for, but we're also looked at as the place where services are provided, right? And for those social workers, for those counselors and school psychologists in the room, you know that, and you're seeing that with your caseloads and what the needs are. Unfortunately, the juvenile justice system is the next level system of default for these kids if their needs are not met. Additionally, what we know about suicide right now is that, unfortunately, suicide is the second leading cause of death for children between the ages of 15 and 24. And suicidal ideation has more than doubled in children ages 5 to 17. Some additional information around suicidal ideology and some recent research that has come out has shown some seasonal patterns in suicidal ideology happening in the fall and the spring that correlate with the school year and potential additional stressors that kids experience during the school year. We do know that the factors that impact mental health are really around the clock, right? The factors that impact our overall well-being occur in the school, in the community, at home, internally. So it's really multifaceted. And we also know that 46% of children in the United States have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience in their lives. Now, with this last one, I want to put a little caveat out there that just because an individual has experienced a traumatic event does not mean that they're going to have ongoing mental health needs or concerns. But it's a data point that indicates that the prevalence of trauma in our society, all right? But as educators, we know that we can look at that data point and we need to figure out how is that impacting a child's daily functioning. Just because they've experienced various traumatic events doesn't necessarily mean it's going to impact their daily functioning. So we always have to be thinking of that. Some additional context is that the U.S. has the highest rate of opioid use in the world, and many of the communities that we're working in are feeling that right now. And some of the federal grants that are coming out as far as supporting promotion of overall student well-being are really explicitly asking for folks to address that level of impact that opioid use is having within their communities. How many folks are familiar with the term electronic aggression? New to many folks, or I see some head nods? Yeah, so the CDC is talking about electronic aggression, and that's that really any kind of harassment or bullying that occurs virtually, whether it's the World Wide Web, through the text messages, emails, things like that. And so it's emerged out as a public health problem, and our kids are being impacted by that. Another variable in their lives that could, at vulnerable points, could impact their overall well-being. And we do know that it's challenging for educators to address factors that occur outside of the school system, and it's hard for community personnel to impact factors that happen inside the school system, right? But that's often how we're located. We often in the world of education engage in planning around students, and we refer the family and the student for services by a community provider, right? And so what I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes is an overall framework that we can think about and use and pull from to think about how can we start moving to a system where we are integrated together, interconnected, and working within the same system. So at this point, I just want you to take about 2 or 3 minutes, think about the context that I just talked to you about, turn to a neighbor and share how does this square with your experience as an educator and the students that you are working with right now. So start with 2 minutes and I'll check in. All right, going to pull us together in about 15 seconds. All right, so what I want to move on to now is talking about the framework, okay? So when we talk, I'm talking about mental health promotion. The agenda illustrated that we're really going to be talking about right now things you can do within Tier 1 to promote your system to promote mental health wellness. And so know that we're doing this within the framework of PBIS. It's a PBIS conference. You all are very well familiar with PBIS, so I'm not going to spend lots of slides on this, but I will indicate to you that think about this from that framework perspective. Think about it as really that framework for how we are adopting, installing, and implementing and monitoring those evidence-based practices. And it goes back to this. We have evidence-based practices. We have the science out there on strategies that we can use to help promote mental health well-being in kids. What strategies to use with kids who are, for instance, have depression or anxiety, right? So we have those practices out there. What we need to be thinking about are how do we infuse those practices within our system? What parts of those evidence-based practices can we maybe pull down into Tier 1 when needed to help create an environment where we're really thinking about promoting the overall kid well-being, right? And using the practices at Tier 1 to anchor those two. The systems are those considerations for how do we train staff, how do we follow up with staff, how do we provide support to staff in doing this. What's come up in the two sessions prior to this, and as well as this one, were segments of information that would continue to be helpful to learn more about, all right? And so one is thinking about how do we build teacher awareness of what anxiety looks like and what depression might look like in kids so they're more aware in the classroom and how to respond, right? As well as other facets of this. So as we move forward across this year and next and ongoing, we will continue to infuse elements of mental health well-being into this conference. So this is a start, and we will continue to build upon this as we move forward. So I talk about that framework, and somebody had mentioned earlier, we have school mental health, and we have PBIS, how does this stuff work together? And it really works together under this interconnected systems framework approach, okay? So still thinking about that framework. And I want you to understand that what we're talking about here is really a structure and a process for which we can really integrate how mental health community-based partners can work within our educational system and with us as educators to have this kind of cohesive, coherent approach to how we address kid need. This is a different way of work for many systems, and it's going to require more than an hour and 15-minute time slot together, but you're getting the information now on what that broader framework looks like, and then we'll talk about some specific strategies that you can take here, run with starting tomorrow in your school, right? So big picture down to a specific practice. What is important here when we talk about that interconnected approach is that it's guided by the critical stakeholders from each partner, the education partner as well as the school-based practitioner partner. And we're really talking about pulling together and having those community partners in our school, in our teams, part of our team members. So having a community mental health provider as part of our Tier 1 team who's bringing in data from the community that we can look at as a Tier 1 team to determine overall what are the patterns of needs within our building and where do we need to enhance our promotion activities. What's inherent here is that when we start having those conversations about bringing community mental health providers in and working with us hand in hand during team meetings and data reviews and planning at our Tier 1 level of what it looks like, what are we going to be teaching kids, how are we going to be reinforcing kids, if they're part of that dialogue and discussion, you need folks at the table who have the authority to reallocate resources, both at the community level and at the school level, so that we're all working together. And this comes together in a memorandum of understanding, so that it's really clear what everybody's roles and responsibilities are. These are conversations that happen at the administrative level in the building or at the district level or even at the state level. Pardon me. The one aspect here is that there are key elements of ISF, or Interconnected Systems Framework, and one that I want to highlight and kind of blow up and expand is that we're really talking about ISF as a way to enhance the PBIS core features. And I alluded to this, where you have effective teams that include that community member, right? A community mental health member that review not just data from the school, like office referral data, but also community data like visits to the food pantry, crisis call, the number of crisis calls in your community. And they're there to review those data points so you get a full landscape of what your building's needs are, or your school system's needs are. They work together to think about what that formal process is for adopting specific evidence-based practices. So your community mental health providers can bring in information about a variety of evidence-based practices based on the needs of your building. And again, along that continuum, while we're going to be talking about Tier 1 today, this is effective across the entire continuum. When we think about the other aspect of early access and that core prevention aspect here, screening has come up as one of those approaches for identifying kids early on, early need. And we even talked about not just early in when they start exhibiting concerns, but also early in age. And I know I heard some pre-K and early elementary folks in here saying that they are seeing an increased need with their students. And so we think about things like screening, and there, you can bring in external screening measures. You can screen using the existing data that you have, but it's just a matter of early identification, early prevention, so that we're catching kids early in the process. And then obviously progress monitoring and coaching. And when we think about coaching at both the systems and practice level, when we do this in an interconnected fashion, we need to be training and coaching our staff together, so our community staff as well as our school staff. The additional key messages, I already talked about PBIS and MTSS as essential to mental health. But what we're also talking about here is that really illustrating that single system of delivery, right? We're not co-located. Even when we have school mental health and PBIS installed in the school, we are often sometimes co-located and not working together in tandem. There's still referrals to different folks without full immersion on the team. So it's really thinking about how can you get your community partners to the table, how can they be a part of your system, and how do you come up with agreements so you're working as one. Additionally, we're talking about access is not enough. We want to be thinking about, oftentimes what we'll do is we'll count, we'll tally, we'll record how many referrals were made and to what agencies, right? And so we want to go beyond that. That's a good start, but we want to go beyond that to thinking about what was the impact, right? So linking a student with mental health services is a great start. It's where we need to go. But following through and figuring out what the impact was is the next step to go, right? And when we're not working as a single system of delivery, it's very hard to monitor the impact. It's hard to monitor the fidelity of what our community partners are doing. And it's hard for them to monitor how we're doing in the school, right? Those generalization things, and that came up from somebody in the audience earlier. And then finally, talking about mental health is for all, and I think I heard that from about 2/3 of the room when we went around and talked about why mental health promotion is important to you or of interest to you. And so we want to be thinking about not just addressing the needs of those kids that have the most intense needs, and we need to do that, and we need to do that well. But we also need to be thinking about how can we promote mental health well-being for all of our kids, and also keeping in mind the needs of our staff as well. So I'm going to move forward so we have some time for activities here. This should look very familiar to you. This should look like the tiered fidelity inventory and all of the features associated with that tiered fidelity inventory. Again, this session here is focused on Tier 1 and a few concrete ways that you can include social emotional development, mental health promotion within Tier 1. And we will have additional sessions moving forward on different topics that hit on mental health well-being across the continuum as we move forward with these coaches meetings. I'm going to address today behavioral expectations first, and then before we leave, I will touch on team composition and feedback and acknowledgement. Pardon me, as an aside to the folks who are here live, during that last little breakout dialogue that you had, I know that folks might need to leave throughout. The box for evaluations is where you registered or where you signed up. So if you can drop those on your way out, that would be great. All right, so let's get back to the content here. We're talking about the TFI Tier 1 practices, and a resource that's available to you that's posted with these slides on pbismaryland.org is the ISF Companion Guide. And what that essentially is the tier fidelity inventory, each feature listed out, whether it's 1.1 for behavior composition or 1.3 for behavioral expectations. It gives the description from the tier fidelity inventory within that document, and then gives you some information of how would you look at this feature from a mental health lens. All right? So how would you look at team composition from a mental health lens? Or how would you look at behavioral expectations and teaching from a mental health lens? And so that's where you get that integration. That's where you get that interconnection of pushing mental health perspective down into Tier 1, and where we often are not thinking about mental health promotion, right? We're often thinking about addressing kids with the most significant needs and their mental health concerns, which we must do. But I'm going to take us down to Tier 1 and think about that primary level prevention and how we can integrate mental health within that. All right, so that companion guide is posted there, and it's a great guide to kind of just look at and say, where can we enhance this with that mental health lens? So let's first talk about behavioral expectations. And so PBIS is on the left, and ISF is on the right. And so with PBIS, with our behavioral expectations, we have 3 to 5 positively stated expectations that are defined across the settings and routines in our building, right? They tell students what we want them to do, and we explicitly teach those expectations through lesson plans across the school year. We're in agreement on that? All right, agreement. Tell me, what are some of the behaviors within your matrix? Give me some examples. So I hear respect. So give me some examples of what respect might look like, or responsible or safe might look like. Treat others nicely. Keep hands, feet, and objects to yourself. What does it look like to be responsible in the cafeteria? Throw your food away. What about in the hallway? Walk at all times. Some schools walk on a certain side. Yeah. What are most of those behaviors that you're listing? They're rule following, they're compliance behaviors, right? And that's a good start. We need to have those compliance behaviors in there. We need to be telling kids, what do? They walk on the right-hand side, you walk in the hallway, you throw your trash away, all right? For elementary schools, how many folks have the pump one instead of a handful of soap, right? Just one pump, wash and go. And so we need that. But what we want to be thinking about is taking that practice and that feature of an expectation matrix where we have listed out our compliance behaviors and extending that and making sure that we're thinking about our student population, thinking about what their needs are, and including some of these pro-social types of skills, right? So going beyond compliance and thinking about more of those pro-social skills. One down here, check in with my feelings and use calming strategies, all right? How many folks have something like that on their matrix? Not many, right? And we wouldn't expect that because it's kind of where we're going with taking that mental health lens, that social emotional development lens into PBIS and that integrated approach. Okay. How many folks have a social emotional behavioral or SEL curriculum? Anybody have second step? I see a few hands, yeah. Anybody have something besides second step? All right, yeah, and I mentioned that because it tends to be the one that comes up a lot. I was telling the group, the last group, that in my son's school, he's in second grade, they must do zones of regulation, the counseling department or the school psychologist must do zones of regulation, and they're now pushing that down into their counseling classes when they go into the classrooms. So that's a universal push down of zones of regulation that they're doing in the elementary school, taking something that they use with small groups and pushing it down into the whole school. So they're teaching certain component skills as part of their lesson planning. And what I'm going to get you to be thinking about is, what do we already have? What are some of the resources that we already have that address critical skills that kids need that are social emotional in nature, or also promotion and prevention in nature around coping strategies that some kids definitely need, but all kids could benefit from. So I want you to think about this and turn to a partner in a second. What skills are employers looking for in potential employees? If you ask a group of managers, what buckets do you think they're looking for the most? So turn to a partner for about a minute and tell yourself, is it academic enablers, social emotional, academic content, or a combination of some? Just pair up and chat. All right, what are you guys thinking? Any takers? Yes?
I think employers who are academic, folks who are academic enablers and social emotional skills. Content, not so much. They want you to be adjusting, they want you to be on time, they want you to be adaptable. They teach you. For instance, we're all here learning right now the work on academic content, but the other two are.
But a general consensus. Show me a hand. Agreed? All right. Anybody with a dissenting opinion want to share their approach? Yes, I'm going to just come up here and hand you this. You can just take on from here for me. That was brilliantly said. That's exactly what we find, is that, and for those reasons, exactly, is that employers are looking for these shoe buckets, really. Your ability to organize yourself, your ability to have time management, your ability to work in a group and manage your own stress levels. And of course, you want some kind of baseline skill level, but for the most part, managers will say, we can train the skills far easier than we can train these types of behaviors, all right? And when we build up a student's behaviors in these buckets, that social, emotional, and academic enablers, we're building up their skill set to be able to interact in a variety of environments with a core set of skills that's going to be very effective for them. Again, promotion types of behaviors. So we want to be focusing on healthy relationships, managing stress, as well as organizational skills and study skills, etc. But right now, really what we're talking about here with the mental health promotion are what are ways that we can infuse that language and that instruction down at Tier 1, where we're teaching kids how to have healthy relationships, how to manage their stress, how to cope in different situations that might be stressful for them or anxiety producing. So I'm going to share with you a few examples, and some of you might have seen these before, but this is intentionally here to show you how you can use an existing tool, an existing practice that you have, not reinvent the wheel, but I want you to be thinking about what resources you already have, what existing curriculum do you already have, and how can you think about how your matrix can serve as a way of alignment here, so that we don't find that we're doing second steps in room 352 on Tuesdays, and then PBIS in the gym on Thursday mornings, and zones of regulations on Fridays, all right? And we want to stay away from having those buckets of interventions and practices and think about alignment and how this can all work together, all right? And so in this school, they wanted to promote or decrease isolation and promote inclusion. Again, if we can build a community where kids learn skills and how to include others that look isolated or look like they're not being included, then you're, again, enhancing those variables that could help with the promotion of mental health well-being. And so on the playground and in the cafeteria, they've included in their matrix to include kids that are alone. Invite those who are alone to join in, and invite people who are alone to join in on your conversation, right? Very simple step, but if it becomes part of your language, part of your instruction, and part of your ongoing practice, it becomes part of an ongoing skill set for your kids. And we have the, obviously the expectations, the natural context, and behavior-specific specific behaviors in your matrix. This is an example of bully prevention, but instead of saying if you see bullying, they've included a routine of if you see disrespect, and included the steps in a specific bully prevention strategy, and that's from Ross and Horner. And so again, it's mapping what the different practices that you have, the different evidence-based approaches you have within one document that shows alignment. And it really integrates those value skills that you have. You still will have your compliance skills about throwing out trash, walking in the hallway, but we need to have that balance of what are those social promotion skills and how to get along with others. And this strategy here is about some trauma-based informed approaches. And so some schools find that you have quite a few kids, a larger proportion of kids that have experienced traumatic events, and it's impacting their functioning in school and perhaps in the community as well. And so instead of kind of providing tier 2 and tier 3 services for a large group of kids, you want to be thinking about what can we do to pull this all down so it's just part of our daily interactions with kids. So we're teaching them on an ongoing basis a set of strategies that are going to be helpful for them to when they are triggered by an event in their life. And so the routine becomes I feel upset, right? It doesn't become the trauma routine. It becomes I feel upset. And when I'm upset, this is what I'm going to do. And we teach around that, right? And with this comes instruction to your classroom teachers, too, about what this routine looks like. And perhaps some additional instruction on traumatic events in a kid's life and how they might manifest in behaviors in the classroom. But here you have use your words, linked to respectful and use safe hands. The safe teaching or the safe expectation has self-check and use calming strategies, and the responsible has ask for help and connect with a safe person. All right. So again, just an illustration of how you can embed trauma-informed practices within your Tier 1 system. I saw quite a few hands go up for second step, and so I like to include the language here of second step so that you can see how you might be able to map the language within a packaged, evidence-based, social-emotional learning curriculum and align that with your school-wide expectations within your matrix, all right? And so for those of you who are have second step and it's part of your instructional process, instead of it just being the packaged lesson that your teachers engage in with the kids on a regular basis, pull that language into your matrix so it becomes the whole school language that kids are, and it makes sense. So when they hear second step, it aligns with their school-wide expectations and it's one seamless process. And again, here, thinking about empathy, all right? Thinking about problem solving, calming strategies, all right? I have one more example before I get you into an activity, and this is from the McFarland's Elementary School. And they were having a little bit of a problem, and I'm sure nobody else does, but of kids reporting problems, right? And so they needed to differentiate for kids and for parents differences between bullying types of behaviors versus teasing behaviors, versus conflict and what to do in those situations. So not just this is what it is and what it isn't, but what do you do? Again, teaching kids a set of skills so when they are confronted with a conflict, or they are confronted with a situation, they know what to do and they can practice those skills. Again, all good skills, think about it, for all, this is going to help all kids. For some kids that are starting to show symptomology of mental health concerns, this is also going to help them as well, all right? So what I'd like you to do now is to take a look at the back of your worksheet, and I want you to, and pair up, even if you're not next to folks from your own county, I want you to pair up and I want you to think about your current teaching matrix. I want you to think about any existing social emotional curriculum that you might have, or evidence-based practices that you have to work with students that have experienced trauma or anxiety, and think about some of those coping strategies, the social skills curriculum that you have, and how you might align that language within your matrix. And just pick one SEL curriculum or practice, and maybe one or two of the expectations and settings to just practice this with. So I want you just to practice the alignment of the language within the matrix, all right? I'm going to start with 7 minutes and then check in at that point, all right?
No question. From the audience?
I'm going to do a quick time check. I know that you're not going to get through your whole matrix. If you would like another minute on this activity, just raise your hand. All right, so we'll come together in about 30 seconds then. As I was walking around, I shared with a few folks that, really at this point, when you think about that mental health promotion at Tier 1, you want to start with the resources you already have, because chances are you have a handful of evidence-based practices around social emotional learning, or evidence-based practices that your counselor or school psychologist might have that are specific to coping strategies or would help students that have experienced traumatic events and that's impacting their functioning in schools. And so use the resources you have. The first group that I met with today, the language around, do you remember that resource mapping activity that you did, back in the day when you were trained on Tier 1 PBIS, where you listed out all of your teams, the members of those teams, what the purpose of that team was, what outcomes you're trying to achieve, the data that you're collecting. In that first session that I was in, somebody said, it reminds me of that we kind of need to go back and figure out what are all the groups doing. She said, we have an empathy team, we have a second step team, we have a PBIS team, and lots of teams working towards the same outcome. And so that's a good opportunity to bring those members of those teams together and really think about how can we map this language out in an organized way so that it is aligned in not just our minds, but our teachers' minds and our kids' minds, and we're pushing this language out as far as social emotional development to all kids across the board at Tier 1. And it brings up an example of a school in Carroll County that took some butcher paper, kind of put it on a wall, and put their matrix on a wall, and blank. It was the expectations here, the settings and routines at the top. And they just took Post-it notes, and they would go through what they had, their existing PBIS matrix and their existing SEL curriculum, and they just started mapping things on that matrix using Post-it notes and moved things around so that they really hit a real comprehensive and aligned matrix in the end that was reflective of all of their efforts to promote the well-being of their kids in school. So those are just some things that you can go and do tomorrow, the next day, while you're thinking about that long-term picture of how do we really integrate mental health across the full continuum, because that's going to take some effort and a little bit of time, but you can start doing these things right away. Some considerations for teaming. Again, this might be something you think more long-term about and getting your admin involved and having these conversations. Can you start thinking about how to bring in community providers into Tier 1 and part of that process and reviewing data at that Tier 1 level? And then considerations for feedback and acknowledgement. I apologize, my graphs are not showing up on this, my visuals, and so it isn't the best slide in the world, but I'll explain it to you. I want you to be thinking about, again, that installation or that companion guide for ISF takes you through each feature and says, how would I approach this with a mental health lens? What are some enhancements to our typical PBIS approach that I can put into place? And when thinking about recognition, I want you to think about the type of recognition activities and events that you have. And oftentimes our events, maybe quarterly or annually or monthly, are kind of those large events, right? Where we bring kids together, we have a celebration of some kind. How many folks have something like that at least once a year? Yeah. Think about your range of kids. And that might not be reinforcing for all, especially kids that have more internalizing behaviors, or they might prefer to do things on a smaller scale. And so make sure to build in some activities for that full range of kids along the way. Right? And we talked a lot about student voice in the last session too, being able to get student voice in what those recognition procedures would look like from a range of kids as well. All right. So before we adjourn for the day, I just want to summarize what we've been talking about, and that we've really seen an increase, and you guys talked about that when you did your introductions and why mental health promotion was of interest to you, that we've seen an increase in mental health needs in our kids over the last 10 years. Schools are really, we're really a place that we're being looked at as the place of helping to intervene with this and prevention, and really start with the prevention lens and promotion of mental health well-being types of skills. You saw what managers appreciate in employees, also those things that help make us resilient, and also our skills that we would teach kids that have mental health concerns to be able to cope with their symptomatology. We want to be able to make sure that we're looking at this across a continuum, and that we're not just waiting to intervene when students' behaviors are of a heightened concern. We definitely need to intervene at that point, but we also need to be thinking about how can we really create that climate and culture that is promotion-oriented of the well-being of a kid, the whole child, and that came up with a few folks during those introductions. Make sure to build it within your existing framework. Don't add anything new. We're not saying go out and buy different curriculum. You have strategies and skills and evidence-based practices within your building. It's just a matter of organizing them and maybe pushing some of these down into tier 1 so that you can promote the mental health well-being of all kids. And that it goes in the last 2 systems here, building that existing framework and reviewing your tier 1 practices for alignment. All right? And so with that, we have a few minutes for questions. If you have any questions, let me know. All right. Well, it is 2:56 on the end of a long day of conferencing. So I will be here for a while if you want to come up and ask any questions before you leave for the day. Otherwise, we appreciate your time here at the coaches meeting. You all have been a really engaged group throughout the day, so we appreciate that. If you could complete your evaluation forms for all sessions that you attended, I did leave an evaluation return box where you signed in with Jerry Bloom this morning. So there's a box out there for you just to return those on your way out. All right. So thank you very much, and safe travels home this afternoon. And thank you to those who joined us via Facebook. Have a good one.